Welcome to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, where we have open and honest conversations about co-parenting, separation, divorce, and the hardest question of all, should you stay or should you go? I'm Kate Anthony, your divorce survival guide, and I'm here to help you navigate some of the roughest waters you've ever swum in and answer some of your toughest questions. I've been to hell and back, and now it's my mission in life to help you get to the other side of this process with your sanity and your heart intact. Hey everyone, welcome back. So today I have with me on the podcast, Bill Eddy. Bill is back, and he is back to talk about a really important topic that's, I feel like, sweeping the nation, and that is adult bullies. And yes, with election season coming up, I feel like the presence of bullies is ever more present. But I also feel that it is an issue that has taken over more than just our political landscape. So that's our conversation today. Today we're going to talk about how bullies create crises out of thin air and then position themselves as the heroes in their made-up crisis story. And Bill is going to share some concrete examples of adult bullying in the world today, how it impacts children when parents are the bullies, and why it's crucial to stand together against bullies in order to take them down. Really important, big stuff today. So that's coming up in just a second. And before we get to our episode, I just want to remind everybody, as we are moving into this holiday season, that I have room on my calendar for my strategy sessions that are open. You can book either 3 or 6 sessions with me. If you're one of those people that's been like, I just need to get through this chunk of stuff and I don't want to do a long-term coaching commitment, but boy, do I need some strategy sessions with Kate, hit me up. And you can get to those by going to kateanthony.com/apply. There's just a Google Doc that you'll just fill out, and then we'll point you in the right direction when we get all your information. So kateanthony.com/apply. And I should also let you know that Bill is the author of the new book, Our New World of Adult Bullies: How to Spot Them, How to Stop Them. And he is the Chief Innovation Officer of the High Conflict Institute, which is based in San Diego, California. He trains lawyers, judges, mediators, and therapists throughout the United States and a dozen other countries in managing high conflict family, workplace, and legal disputes. He's written over 20 books and manuals and has a great blog over on Psychology Today. And I love having conversations with Bill Eddy. So here is today's. Bill Eddy, thank you so much. Welcome back to the show. I am so happy to have you back.
And I'm glad to be back with you, Kate. It's always wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. And you have a new book.
That's right.
This is so exciting. Adult Bullies. I love that you've titled this Bullies because it keeps us away from is he a narcissist? Is he not a narcissist? Is he right? The diagnosing of the personality, and really keeps it on the behaviors.
Exactly. And that's very much the intent. And even labeling people a bully is something we recommend against, is look at the behaviors and what to do about them.
Yes. Okay. Let's start with, how do you define an adult bully? What is your definition of that? If you have a definition, you do. You've many in the book, but
So how I define it is basically there's 6 characteristics. One is preoccupation with blaming others. Another is all or nothing thinking. It's all other people's fault, and they're going to punish them, even when they don't deserve that at all.
Mm-hmm.
Unmanaged emotions is often the case, so they may start screaming at you. And extreme behaviors, that's where we get into domestic violence and other extremes. But those are what I often think of as high conflict behaviors. Bullies have that, plus they want to dominate or destroy the other person. And so actually, I think of bullies as the most high conflict people.
Mm.
And that's a big part of the problem is they want to create a situation in which they dominate you. And they may start in a situation that's fairly equal, but their goal is to then be in charge, to dominate, to put down, to, be seen as superior, and to be able to control the other person and where they go and what information they give out. And that can be in the workplace, in relationships, in neighborhoods, etc. Online for sure.
Absolutely. You talk a lot about this in the book, and I think it is so important to understand that the mindset of a bully is so different from the mindset of a non-bully, right? That you want to solve a problem. You are coming to the table to try to solve the problem, to try to come to consensus or compromise. They just want to dominate.
Exactly. And that's what happens in relationships is that switch happens at some point. And most bullies can be very charming. And we actually say that's a warning sign. You want to check that out.
Mm-hmm.
Not all charming people are bullies, but most bullies can be charming people for a while, like a month or an hour, or maybe almost a year. They can't keep it up more than a year.
Yeah.
That's why we tell people wait a year before you get married these days, because
absolutely,
you really can't tell. At some point, show the whole rest of things. And so we see people who on the wedding night say, okay, guess what? I no longer like bird watching. I just said that because I knew you did. But now I'm in charge, and so you better knuckle under because, it's going to be my way from now on. And we know people have told us that and they're shocked. And turns out they married a bully. So that can happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think you'd almost be lucky if they said it overtly on the wedding night, right? If they actually said the words, I basically conned you, right? Because most of them don't say it. They just start behaving differently.
Right.
Right. You talk about in your book this 3-part, the bully story, like the 3 parts of the bully story. And I think that's how they get so much of their dominance and power and control. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah. So, and it's really at the core of the book is that they really manipulate your primitive emotions and that they talk about them having primitive emotional power. And the bully story is the way it's mostly expressed. And the bully story has 3 parts, and that's why it's so compelling. Mm-hmm. The first part is there's a terrible crisis, and it might be your life. They might say, your life is a mess. You need me. You need me to save you. This activates our primitive fear. So they tell you things to activate your fear. No one will love you except for me. No one will like you except for me. No one will tolerate you. Look at you. All of that except for me. Mm-hmm. Then the second part is that they say there's like an evil villain or crazy person. And in some cases, they say it's somebody else and they want you to gang up on somebody else with them. We see this like in the workplace, but in relationships, it's you. You're a mess and you're the cause of a mess. And you're crazy and terrible. And, I can't let you leave the house because you're such a mess. And what they do is they hook people's anger and they turn that at themselves. And this seems to be a real primitive emotional response that happens without us even consciously deciding to have that happen. And so people get angry at themselves, and then they're the hero. So there's a fantasy crisis, there's a fantasy villain, and there's a fantasy hero, which happens to be the bully. And the bully, I talk about these three emotions as fear, rage, and these are primitive emotions that all mammals have, by the way. Fear, rage, and love, loyalty. And I call it love/loyalty because they say it's love. They want you to love them and they love you. They may love bomb you. They may just over the top with how wonderful and perfect and everything you are when they're getting you at the beginning. But then what they really want is loyalty. So you will tolerate their worst behavior. You will support their worst behavior. You will help them in the world when they're bullying other people. And that's the loyalty. So it's really loyalty, but I call it love loyalty because it comes packaged as that. So now you have three primitive emotions that they activate, and they can activate all of these without your conscious awareness. And that's what really surprises people. They say, why did I fall in love with this person? Or why was I afraid? And I talk about in the book, and it's uncomfortable, but I talk about rape victims often blame themselves, have a sense of shame. Why did I freeze? Why did I not just kick them in the balls and run away? And over again, I've heard that story from people, and they turn it against themselves and develop an eating disorder or don't go out, isolate themselves, all of that. So it's activating these primitive emotions that people don't understand because they're not usually activated in daily life. And that's the secret power of bullies, is activating these hidden emotions. So the bully story is one to make you afraid, there's a terrible crisis, one to make you angry, there's a terrible person and it may be you, and that you should love me and be loyal to me, the bully. And that's an emotionally compelling story that traps people. It's also how cults get formed. And just think, you're in a cult with a bully. And when you look at it that way, you go, I got to get out of here, usually.
Well, right. But the whole point is that they've activated all of those emotions, those primitive emotions, so you don't see it, right? This is, you talk in the book about Jonestown, about Nexium. You give some very sort of concrete and hard to ignore examples of how this plays out. And politically, this is what so much politics is based on. There is this fantasy crisis, right? And the fantasy villain of whatever that is. If it's let's take, for example, a crisis at a border. We won't name the border, right? Right. There's this whole
Worldwide.
There's a worldwide border crises, right? But there is this manufacturing of, as you say, this crisis, and you see this play out everywhere from on the playground to the national stage.
And that's a lot of what the book is about, is that bullies have the same patterns of behavior, and that currently they're hidden to most people because they're activating primitive emotions, and people aren't aware of why they believe things, why they feel things, why they feel like doing things. And so it goes up to the international, invading other countries. It's just like a domestic violence perpetrator invading another country and telling you it's your fault. We had to save you from yourself.
Right.
And that's kind of what we see. But there's border issues around the world, and there's a lot of movement around borders, although it isn't that much more than history really tells us. Humans have always been on the move. But is it a crisis or is it a problem to solve? And I say bullies tell you that these things are all a crisis, so you'll give your power to me. when in fact, these are complicated problems to solve that can be solved and take a lot of people's thinking and a lot of negotiations and a combination of setting limits and having empathy for people. And that's by and large how countries have worked, the last 100 years. We've managed these problems, but bullies say they're unmanageable and I'm the one you have to take care of all this. And one thing that just throw this in, I know we got too far deep into it, but countries have been becoming democratic at a rapid rate since World War II. More and more countries becoming democracies. Well, starting in 2004, that reversed itself. And now more countries are becoming what they call strongman leaders or even dictators, like you see with Putin in Russia. It seems to be going along with how our media has in many ways been promoting the bullies, saying you want to be powerful in the world, then be a bully. You want to get ahead, be a bully. And we see that on the playground too. Kids go, well, hey, it's okay. I saw it on TV.
Right. Or my dad says that if I don't get what I want, I should punch you or whatever. When you said about, we know this, that countries throughout the world have always had border issues, all of this, right? That's the logical thinking. That's the upper cortex thinking, the fantasy crisis, all of these things, they're activating this primitive part of the brain that those two sides don't function right at the same time. So you talk about emotional repetition in the book, right? That we have to keep hammering at those crisis points to keep people scared, because if they think logically, they actually realize this is not true.
Yes. People don't dig very deep, but they may be critical of a national leader and say, well, I don't like that leader, I disagree with them. But they're not critical of, is there really a crisis? And that's where I really blame a lot our news media, because they want to show people yelling at each other in Congress and throwing things and all of this. They don't want to explain the issues. We need to know the issues. We live in a complex time. Issues are complex. If any other occupation, you would say there's no easy answer to this. We've got to figure it out. But somehow the media presents problems as very simple. There are crises, there's an evil villain, and you need a hero to fix it.
That's right. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about that. Okay, Bill, before the break, we were talking about the media. You talk in your book about how the bullies rely on emotional repetition. I mean, the media, they are the sort of, I don't know if they started the emotional repetition with Fox News and 24-hour news cycle and all of that. Like, where did this begin, do you think? Where did we start to go wrong with the media?
I really think it began between 30 and 40 years ago, really. And that the switch happened when TV went into Congress. And that was 1979. C-SPAN started broadcasting congressional hearings. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't imagine something more boring than watching Congress in action discussing the fine points of the nuances of a phrase of a law that governs water rights in Timbuktu. So what happened is that some people, well, I'll just say some people, decided to put on a show for the television. So, for example, there was one congressman who developed the habit of railing against the other side on C-SPAN.
Oh.
And he was saying, and you can't even answer this, can you? And he'd say all these things. Well, he was saying this to an empty congressional chamber, to an empty House of Representatives. And so the next morning, he would be on TV. You would see him in the house railing against the other side and not a peep coming from the other side. They seemed to tolerate it because he was so brilliant, they were dumbstruck. So he started getting a reputation. Then he started telling people on his side, use words like idiot and lazy and stupid and daffy and all these words for the other side on the media. And I think it was that broadcasting. But there's a second step here. There's three steps. The second step was the 1990s. There used to be something called the Fairness Doctrine, which made sure that radio and television, anybody that used federal airwaves, had to give both sides of a political argument. So if you were going to give an editorial, I favor the bill number 191, you had to give someone else to say, I'm against bill number 191. Well, that went out around 1990. By the mid 90s, cable partisan news got started. So you mentioned Fox News, MSNBC, CNN was already around, but they did a lot more political news. And so they could take one side. So we had one-sided news. And if you listened to one-sided news, you got the bully's story from that point of view. And it's like, the terrible things are happening. Those people over there are evil villains. They're creating a terrible crisis and follow me. And so you get two or three stations doing that, plus a lot of radio. And you end up with a polarized country. You end up with kids seeing people yelling at each other, dominating each other, trying to destroy each other. But my theory is the third step was social media. 2004, Facebook got started. 2005 or six, I think Twitter got started. Starting in 2004, the move to democracies reversed itself, and we started having strongman or dictator or bully leaders around the world. And I think this is a product of our media. And that if we think it's happening, we go, why are we so polarized? What did we do wrong? We're polarized because media polarizes people if it's allowed to. And it repeats and repeats. You talked about repetition.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't get too deep into the political side of it, but it really is happening to us and activating people to be enraged. And that becomes a dangerous thing. So we have to be self-aware and check ourselves.
So it's interesting. I just did a quick Google search and realized that 2004 was also the year that reality TV started to come more into the forefront, including and especially The Apprentice, which started in January of 2004. It feels like there's something in alignment there, Bill.
Well, all of those shows simplify everything into a bully story.
Right.
There's
exactly.
a terrible crisis. And this is drama. Look at history.
Sure.
Shakespeare and all those people. You knew you had to have a problem, then you had to have a solution, and then you had an outcome. Right. But today, bullies are saying there's a problem when it's just a problem, and they say it's a crisis, and you have to just listen to me as one person. And we're being conditioned to the idea that we need heroes because the world is in such terrible shape. Right. And the reality is the world is not in such terrible shape. There's problems to solve. But the last person that's going to solve today's problems is a single hero. We really need teamwork to solve today's problems. And that's where it comes to having two parents in a family.
Okay, so bringing this back to bullying in relationships. Now, I know you just said having two parents, but I also want to say that, one of the sort of hallmarks of domestic violence too is, right, the crisis, the fake crisis, and you're a mess, and I'm the only one who will love you, who can fix you, who can sort of oversee this and make sure that you're a benefit to society and all of those things, right? we also, as you said, see this in parenting. It's such a complex issue, but why don't we start with just the question about what are some ways that parents are might unintentionally turn a child away from the other parent?
Partly what we've been talking about is in the moment of separation, of divorce, that emotions are high and that people forget and say a lot of things that the kids overhear, that the kids really shouldn't hear, that parents aren't as self-aware, that there's a kid in the room when they're railing against the other parent.
Yeah.
The thing that's so tricky is parents go through the grieving process. But the anger stage of the grieving process is often what the kids hear the most.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah.
They absorb that and get an all or nothing perspective. It's all terrible. The other person, the other parent is all terrible. Look what they've done. Or not even look what they've done. The emotions are just intense. And then over a couple of years, most parents move through the grieving process and calm down and start saying more positive things. But during this time of intensity, I think is where we see kids get absorbing their parents' negativity. And the way our brain works is kids don't know exactly why they should be angry at the other parent, but they feel angry at the other parent and they make up reasons. So they may say, I don't like the way my dad wears his hair. Or, I don't think my mother's good at math. But when the other parent's expressing too intense emotions, the kids go, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe it's all my fault. But the emotions, I think, are the biggest problem. That when parents are venting, you really want to protect the kids from that because it makes them feel like it's all or nothing. And that's where you start seeing kids say negative things against mom or against dad that don't really have to be promoted. And I want to say like 80% of parents are careful about what they say around the kids.
Sure.
But I'd say maybe 10%, maybe even more of divorcing parents aren't careful what they say around the kids. And that's where the biggest problems come in. So the way to prevent being a bully for your child is to protect your child from your most intense emotions.
And it's so hard because, first of all, they're around all the time, right? You're in the midst of this incredible crisis. And if you're somebody who has been betrayed or has had a sudden sort of traumatic event of discovering infidelity or something like that, right? Hiding that from your kid is going to be it's going to be hard, right?
Yeah.
And also, my God, they hear everything. They're little sponges. It's amazing how perceptive they are and how much they see and how much they hear and how much they absorb. And also that they don't have the brain development yet in place to process all that they're absorbing. Ugh, it's so challenging. It's so challenging.
What we really promote is teaching the 4 big skills: flexible thinking, managed emotions, moderate behavior, and checking yourself. And we teach that in our New Ways for Families coaching and counseling methods. But the important thing here is that kids hear the full range so that they hear what we call repairing comments. And so they say, I just said, your dad's a jerk, and I'm sorry I said that. That's not what I mean to say. I value your relationship with him. And I was just angry with him about something, but I also really appreciate that he's good at math and that he loves you and that, we all want you to do well. So you make a repairing statement.
That's right.
If you said something awful. And frankly, all healthy relationships have that. A healthy marriage has a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions, but those negative interactions happen. but you've got all the positive in the bank to help carry you through. And that's what kids need to hear from their parents about each other is, yeah, there's no parent that hasn't made mistakes and said things they shouldn't, have done things they shouldn't. But you put that into context and kids go, okay, this is real life. We can all make mistakes. Even me, even Johnny can make a mistake because his parents made mistakes and they've forgiven each other.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what would you say? So those are the unintentional, right? Those are the unintentional ways that we might badmouth the other parent and sort of unintentionally plant ideas in our children's heads. What about some of the more intentional ways? And how do you suggest and talk about in the book helping kids sort of understand and navigate the complexities of that?
Yeah, I think that hearing from other people is so important that, I'm one of those that says it does take a village to raise a child, that what kids hear from more people makes a difference to them. So their parent says something terrible, but grandma says, that's not the case. Don't worry about that. Let's talk about what we're going to have for dinner. So if the people around the child also can help ride through the storm and the difficulties, I think that helps. And for kids to know, and as kids get older, they start seeing what people say and what people don't say. If they've got people around them teaching these 4 big skills, flexible thinking, managed emotions, moderate behavior, and checking themselves, they're going to go, okay, mom just kind of slipped there, or dad just kind of misspoke there. And I'm just not going to pay a lot of attention to that. Because I think that's the thing, is what you get the most of. Emotional repetition is such a key in really upsetting people, I think hurting other people, and a big part of bullying. And a lot of people are bullying without realizing it. But if the kids learn these skills for resilience, I think they can kind of get through that.
Okay, we need to take another quick break, and then on the other side of that, I want to pick up where we just left off. Be right back. Okay, we're back. So before the break, you were talking about how, well, grandma says that's not true, right? And I think that one of the tricks or one of the traps people can fall into is we start to say, no, that's not true, but then we might go further in the other direction and then start blaming the other parent. Well, that's not true. Actually, what your dad said is blah, blah, blah. And your dad did this and did that, right? And so we have to be careful when you talk in the book about people standing together against the bully, right? When people come forward, and whether it's the Harvey Weinstein's victims, right? When people start coming together en masse to stand against a bully, we can actually take them down, or at least temporarily, because now his sentence is overturned. But it's another story. But we also have to be careful that when we stand together, we're not actually shifting into bullying behaviors on that other side, right? Confusing.
That's why we teach both parents in divorce and separation and divorce these new ways for family skills. And so they learn flexible thinking, managed emotion, moderate behavior, checking yourself, and hear that from each parent. If they do our counseling method of that, then they have 3 parent-child sessions. They're not together, so it could be like a domestic violence case, but they hear both parents saying, we believe in this, and we want you to also think this way, that, managed emotions is good, moderate behavior is good, flexible thinking is good, checking ourselves instead of pointing fingers at other people. So having both parents learn that. And you said, a little bit ago about someone intentionally doing bad things. That's where we get into domestic violence and stuff, and people need treatment for that. And they should get that rather than arguing about, how much was it this or that. It's like, hey, this is a problem, then this is a treatment for it, and people are better off to get it. We did a series of 6 videos on domestic violence in family court cases, recorded with 16 experts who recorded it during the early year and a half of COVID. And we talk in there about groups and treatment and the skills people can learn, and they can come out and have a family that has more empathy in it, that people can learn empathy for each other, and that kids can see their parents as role models, both of their parents. So if there's a problem, we need to address the problem and change the behavior, rather than endlessly arguing over the problem. And the other thing I think is we need to not turn into bullies ourselves as professionals, as support people, rather than turning everything into sides, which is the family court process, is saying, hey, we've got empathy for everybody. Let's figure out the problem, and address the problems and treat the problems and help this family get on a better track, rather than deciding who's the bad guy. Now, I've been a lawyer for over 30 years, and that's the structure of court, is to decide who's the bad
guy. Right, right.
And families can't work that way. And
No.
frankly, societies can't work that way too much. You've got to see people that you set limits on and still have empathy for them while you set limits. That's part of the focus of the book.
Yes, it is. And consequences, right, that are followed through on. But I want to go back to what you're saying about people getting treatment, because one of the things you talk about in the book is that bullies, you want to solve the problem, they want to dominate, and that they see things always as win or lose, and that they tend not to learn or change. So what kind of treatment would work for somebody like this? Like, how does that work? If you've got somebody who is not willing to take responsibility, who's not interested in changing, who only wants to dominate and win, how do they get treatment?
Well, the treatment depends a lot on the setting. So when I was just talking about like domestic violence perpetrators, I think 52-week programs where they go for an hour and a half a week with a group and a group leader that talks about behavior. And I mentioned that we did these videos. We interviewed someone that does that treatment. And he said about 70% of the men, and it's mostly men, come out with better skills and able to stop hitting. Whether they totally stop trying to control finances, healthcare, and all of that, there's kind of a range. But he says there's 30% that don't get anything out of it.
Sure.
And that 30% may be more, your antisocial personalities who it's built into their genetic, programming that they're going to try to dominate people. And it may be they're the ones that really need to spend more time in jail and have threats of jail as the only way to impact their behavior, and that people need to be made safe from them. There may be permanent restraining orders necessary. So there's that extreme, one end, which has some success, but it's not permanent. I totally believe in prisons and jail when necessary.
Right.
But on the other side of this is coaching and counseling. And we found, like our New Ways for Families counseling method, that we've been able to help some families get on a better track and treat each other with more respect and become more flexible, even though their personality may lean towards wanting to be a bully. I'd say with counseling and coaching, like in the workplace, we have coaching, New Ways for Work coaching. We have all these new ways. It's new skills to help people be equal relationships, which I talk about in the last chapter. But the thing with this is in the workplace, we'd say about half of people are able to improve their behavior and about half the people aren't. So my belief is give it a shot through counseling, coaching, group therapies for a year. My eyes are wide open. We're not reaching everybody.
Right, right.
I think we need to try and reach the people we can. And let's just say half the bullies can benefit and change their behavior, and half the bullies can't. So let's have strategies that help both groups and set limits and protect society, like from Harvey Weinstein.
Right. It's just, it's like when you say the 70% come out and they stop hitting. I mean, hitting is only one piece when you've got somebody who's entrenched in coercive control because that's how they get by, right? Are those 70% just learning new ways of masking? Are they learning the language to be able to get by? They're not hitting because that gets them in trouble, but now they sort of go a little bit more undercover.
Well, the sense I got from the treatment provider with that is that one thing I asked is, I said, can you teach people empathy that come in without much or without it? And he said, he thinks most of them we can. So the 70% he sees as making progress in many areas, including not hitting, but having more empathy for their partner or co-parent, having more empathy for the kids. And generally, he said, the way you reach people is you start with the kids because they don't want their kids. He said, most of these people don't want their kids to grow up abusing their partners. They want their kids to be happy, and they don't want their kids to be victim of abusive behavior.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of how they and they have role play exercises and things where they're in the position of the other person. So I don't want to, minimize that the success that many people have with this that does go beyond just stopping hitting. But I'm also realistic that there are people that learn to stop hitting but continue with various forms of coercive control, like blocking people from leaving and manipulating the finances and bad-mouthing them to their kids. I've had several cases where there's a domestic violence perpetrator who also is turning the kids away from their other parent, often their mother.
Right. Yeah. It happens all the time because they've lost power and control over the spouse by when they got divorced. So now they're going to use the children as the next line of weapon against the person that they have seemingly lost control over.
Yeah, we see that a lot, but I want to say, so we see a whole range here. So I'm not hopeless.
Yes, no, realistic. I hear you. Yes, I know. It's complicated, Bill. It's really complicated. And you talk about how complicated it is in the book. So I do so appreciate that. You say in the beginning of the book that you really feel like the adult bully, like we've talked about like 2004 being a huge sort of crisis point in this.
Turning point.
And then 2020, you say the pandemic was another one. Why is that? What happened during the pandemic that you feel like this is?
Well, it seems to me people were trapped at home. So we know domestic violence increased, and there's plenty of statistics on that. First 2 years of COVID. We know that workplace bullying increased. So I've got statistics from the Workplace Bullying Institute. They did a big survey, I believe it was the end of 2021, which showed that, like bullying online, that what happened is people lost some of their social skills, I think, by not being out and about, but also being able to go online. And online teaches people there's no consequences. I think of the online universe, the internet, as a values-free environment. 100%. And what people need to have relationships, healthy relationships, is you need to have limitations. You need to have empathy. You need to have restraints. You need to have a conscience. And what's happened, I think, in many ways, the internet in many settings is taken over by people that don't have empathy and don't have a conscience and don't have self-control over their emotions. And so they tend to dominate the internet. And I mentioned some research that online it looks like everybody's becoming more hostile.
Mm-hmm.
But the research shows it's not. It's the people that are hostile offline, but they're louder online, and everybody else just kind of shuts down or drops out of a
Yes.
lot of these conversations. So social media is dominated in many ways by bullies because everybody else goes, I don't want to be part of this, but they still listen. And that's a dangerous thing.
I think that's right. And in 2020, I'm just going to bring this back to somewhat where we started. In 2020, we were also at a bit of a crisis point, not just the pandemic, but also with a lot of bullies in power across the world.
Yeah.
And we were sort of seeing the rise of this kind of behavior and glorifying. They were winning in some way. They were in power, right? So they were winning. Do you feel like that had an impact?
Oh, sure.
On people's behavior as well?
All levels of society. And what's interesting is a quote I have early in the book is from the Bullying Institute survey.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just going to pull it out and read it.
Oh, great.
It said 58% of respondents agreed that the display of bullying, disrespect, and intolerance of the opinions of others by politicians and public figures affected workplaces because they encouraged aggression and granted permission to ignore rules. And I would say that kids got the same message because of watching TV, overhearing the news, and social media. You see all the worst behavior in the world. And I know of kids having conversations saying, well, it's okay to push girls. I saw, these people doing it on TV, so it's okay. And you get 6 or 8-year-old boys saying, oh, you're allowed to push girls. And I thought you weren't. It's turned a lot of things upside down. But here's my quick analysis of this. Over this course of all these years, that politics stopped being about government or very little about government and became very much about entertainment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because of the media, what grabs attention, the congressional hearings and all of that, that what the values are of government are details, compromise, coalitions, boredom, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And values of entertainment are conflict, crisis, chaos, anger, fear, drama, heroes, villains. And what we get today is an entertainment form of politics without even realizing it. Yeah. And people are going, the image is what I'm going to go for. And the reality is the image doesn't necessarily tell you anything about what's good government. It tells you about a personality. And right. A personality can look like they have a lot of excitement and energy, and they know who the enemies are and who the heroes are. But that doesn't tell us anything useful.
I think that's such an amazing analysis, and it's so true, right? The kind of more boring, I'm just getting stuff done. I'm actually affecting a lot of change, but it's not flashy and nobody's hearing about it. That's really under the radar. And maybe not as attention grabbing, but certainly more effective government.
Yeah. And I think I look at European governments. So I look at England, where they had Brexit because of the terrible, evil EU was controlling us and stuff. And we want to be free. Well, that was a bully story. Right. There wasn't a crisis. There were issues and problems, and they have them today. They didn't solve any problems. They just had a pretend crisis. And universally, people in England, the majority say Brexit was a terrible idea.
Terrible.
But it was a fantasy. It was a fantasy crisis. And of course, the politician that promoted it the most got thrown out of office after a while because it became evident that he's not someone you can count on. He's just a bully is all he was.
That's right. So, Bill, to close us out, what do you see in our future? Do you see the trend of adult bullying continuing to rise? Do you see this leveling out at some point? Like, what do you see?
We see is that it's a question of educating people about bullies. And as people recognize bullies at all levels of society, in families, in communities, in politics, in the workplace, online, they realize we do need limits, and we need to set limits on this person or that behavior. My hope, it's kind of a race in a way between bullying and stopping bullying. We're caught off guard by all this bullying. People don't know what to do. They freeze when someone starts ripping them apart in front of other people verbally. They're like, I don't know what to do. And so they freeze. As the first response is often just a freezing. And we say in the beginning of the book is I want people to learn these warning signs so they don't get in as deep with bullies. They also learn how to defend themselves. And by society learning to set more and more limits on bullies and recognize patterns of behavior, we can get the benefit of them. They have, one of my favorite bullies was Steve Jobs, the guy that invented iPhones and iPads and stuff. And he had a big reputation as a bully, but he had contributions to make, and they set limits on him. His management team set limits on him, and he actually could be successful. So I think as a society, we need to do that. We need to set limits at all levels, and we need to show more role models of positive behavior. And we need to say more, just like we shouldn't see cigarettes on TV. I think that the worst bullying shouldn't be shown on TV either, because people catch it like secondhand smoke. We've got kids now saying, I can push girls because I saw it on TV. I saw that man do it.
Yes. So much good stuff. Bill, thank you so much for coming back on. I love this book. One of my favorite parts is at the end, you have a list of 40 behaviors of high conflict people, which I think I feel like that should just be a flyer that's just like posted all over the place, because they're so clear. There are 40 of them, but they're quite succinct, and they paint quite a clear picture.
And they're predictable. And one of the things throughout the book, I want to say, all this stuff is predictable. People tell me, you must have met my boss. You must have met my uncle. Right. And it's like, no, these are human patterns that everybody can recognize.
That's right.
And I'll tell you, when people go, oh, there's a bully story, I know about that. I'm not going to buy that. Once that's part of the culture, I think it's going to be so much calmer, because bullies aren't going to get very far. People are going to say, cut it out,
That's right.
Don't be ridiculous. Instead of today giving all that repetition and attention and telling others and spreading it all over the internet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I so agree. Bill, where can people find you, all of your work, your book, and everything that you do?
So highconflictinstitute.com, that's www.highconflictinstitute.com. We've got books, we've got videos, we've got consultation, we do training, and we have a lot of free articles, probably 50 free articles that talk about bullying, about families, divorce, workplace, just every kind of situation. We really focus on teaching skills, and that's where the answer to all this is if everybody learns more skills, how to manage ourselves and how to manage the bullies in our lives, we'll all be a lot happier.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Bill Eddy. Always a pleasure. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. If you like what you hear, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in and leave me a review. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at The Divorce Survival Guide. I'll see you next time, and until then, remember, you, my love, deserve to be happy.